what if I don't want to give? Or what if giving is kind of a scary topic for me? Let's talk about it. This is Bite Size Theology. Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of Bite Size Theology, a ministry of Springfield First where we tackle big topics around faith, one bite at a time. I'm your host, Allison Means, and today I'm joined by Justin Snyder, and we're going to talk about generosity.
Yes, we are.
Yes, we are.
Well, yeah. So what do you think? Generosity. What prevents us from being generous? And what if we just don't feel like giving? I think those questions are with us maybe more than we recognize sometimes. I know I've been in a situation where I work at a church. And so sometimes I have to get up in front of people and encourage generosity.
Right.
But then I'll be put in a situation outside of my work in the church where maybe it's like a fundraiser for something else. And I feel, I don't know, maybe not always open to generosity in those avenues. So I think this hits every one of us at some level.
Absolutely agree with that. You know, there's, like you said, there's times where like maybe you're asked to round up and you're like, why?
Yeah.
What are you really going to do with this? Or maybe we're not sure about the motives of the other party.
Or school fundraisers.
Oh
man. Well, we won't go there.
That's
That's another topic. Yes.
For another day.
but we get, how many appeals at the end of the year necessarily, or people, really good organizations just need help financially, or they need their annual support raise and things like that. So it's very common to hear appeals for generosity. Yeah. But for people of faith, that comes with maybe some other layers, and it can hit us at different places. That's one thing I've noticed. I don't know about you, but someone can stand up in the church and say, to encourage generosity, but man, that lands differently depending on who people are and what their life experience has been.
Oh yeah. I mean, a lot of times we encounter people in the church who are, coming from a place where they have a lot of hurt, where as soon as you mention money, a wall is up.
Right. And sometimes for good reason. Like I think of people I've known in the past where, let's say they grew up they had a rougher go at it growing up, and maybe they lived in a situation of poverty, of lack, of scarcity. Maybe they, needed to go to the food pantry and be the recipient of other generosity, other people's generosity. And maybe there's some shame, maybe there's some trauma around these things. And so years later, they walk into a church and they hear some smiley pastor get up there and say, hey, give your money. And it just is like, no, it just hits them in a way that is almost just troubling and sometimes perhaps offensive, maybe even to hear that. And that makes sense. And I'd say to them especially, it's okay if this is not a season in your life where you're able to be generous. Let's say with your finances, that's okay. Yeah. There's more that could be said to that.
There's other ways to be generous as well.
There's other ways to be generous. Yeah. And I think sometimes the church has seen wisdom in, or people who are followers of Christ have seen wisdom in and broadening the scope of our generosity to not just the money, the funds that we can give, or what we can Venmo out to people, but also what we have to offer as far as our time and our talents and things like that. And so for somebody who is in a position where they just simply, like, money is very, very tight, I would not necessarily say that they should be worried about hitting a dollar amount of generosity, but rather what else can you give? How can you be generous in a different way? With the hopes that maybe that generosity would grow eventually to a place where you could give
where hopefully circumstances change for you, and then maybe you are in a place where you have a little bit, where you don't feel like something devastating is going to happen if I don't use every single penny of this to pay my bills. Yeah. Yeah.
And another thing is I don't think it's right for people to feel compelled to be generous to things they just don't feel that great about. I mean, and I say this with a lot of, reservation, I guess, but at the same time, like, so if someone were to give to the church, for example, out of kind of this begrudging sense of obligation and duty, Well, that's not necessarily cheerfully giving.
Right.
And so I would just assume that those folks not give until they could give from a joyful place. But I think sometimes what changes for many of us is when we see what good our giving can do. And maybe there's a trend now for younger people. I don't know. Maybe I've read this in other places. Younger people want to see what their giving is actually doing, the difference it's making in real
Yeah,
in
I
the
think
real
there's
world.
a desire, which as a millennial, I guess, there's a desire with people my age and around my age for there to be transparency, because we've heard and seen of organizations not being good stewards with money, or there's been people in the news like private jets and things like that.
The pastor with the private jet.
Right. And I think,
which isn't a bad idea, when I think about it, like associate pastor with a private jet, just kidding. Don't.
I think it just has left a bad taste in a lot of people's mouths.
Yeah.
And so they appreciate transparency of knowing that I'm giving you this in good faith, that you're going to go use it to help people, and to see that, yes, it is actually going out, into the community, into the world, to do the things that we've said it's going to do, goes a long way.
It goes a long way. Yes, absolutely. I agree. And also because oftentimes generosity strikes at the issues of money and economics and wealth and class, we also live in a comparison culture where, we're kind of looking over our heads. Okay, what are they doing? What's my neighbor doing? And that, when it's imported onto an idea of giving out of our faith, it just doesn't lead to very fruitful ends. And so finding ways then, so addressing barriers to generosity, I think it depends on who we are, where we came from, and what we currently understand our calling from God to be. But I do say, all that said, I do think that God wants us to grow in generosity, that to be generous people is a desire that God wants for us.
Oh, yeah.
And so finding ways to do that make sense for where we are in our lives right now, I think is a good and noble thing, and that God meets us in that journey as well.
It's also just deeply fulfilling.
Yeah.
I mean, even if we're not talking about like a monetary thing, if we're talking about volunteering your time, getting involved in a community group, mentoring, like a Big Brothers Big Sisters kind of thing, or any number of really wonderful organizations that exist out there that doesn't really cost you anything to be a part of, to go just give your time and your care to someone else, to sit with them, to listen to them, to, rejoice with them and grieve with them. Like, those things feel great.
It's an incredible gift. That is very generous to use your time in that way.
Yeah. I mean, if you've ever just gone and talked to somebody at a nursing home for a little bit.
Yeah.
Just the joy on their face.
Yeah.
To have somebody to talk to for a while.
Yeah.
And you walk out feeling so blessed by the time, not just wow, I did a good thing, but you receive so much back from that.
Yeah.
From just chatting with a new person and knowing that, you guys fulfilled each other for a little while.
And everyone will hear you say that and say, yeah, that's a good idea, but are we leaving the space in our lives?
Ooh,
or are we leaving, in the case of giving, are we leaving space in our budgets, or are we leaving space in our calendars, or whatever we have to do that generosity? And that's where I look at myself and I point that the spotlight on myself is stewarding one's calendar and your day. I say, I'm just too busy. I can't go do, I can't go volunteer because I'm just too busy. Well, wait a minute. You maybe had a couple hours on this day where you could have, if you wanted to give that time away. So that's a challenge to people like me who maybe can hide under the umbrella of busyness, but actually, if we can take an audit of our time, we might see some openings to really be generous that we might not see unless we actually take the time to do that.
Oh, you're 100% right. It's very easy to go, oh, well, I can't. Or, if you are talking about a monetary thing, to not take the time and look at your budget and go, I really could rein in this, completely non-essential spending.
Yeah, right.
Like maybe
Whatever.
I bought a lot of fast food or something.
Right, yeah.
Like, did I need that?
Yeah, we won't talk about coffee today.
No, I was intentionally not saying coffee.
Let's just avoid that topic. But, yeah. Now, I will say this. I think it's wise to go to Jesus and to read what Jesus said.
Yeah.
And we've talked, not too long ago about how something like a quarter of Jesus's teachings are on issues of economics or, money, things like that. But that said, Jesus has I think we need to recognize that those are very important teachings and to grow in those. Like, for example, in Luke chapter 12, Jesus says, beware against all kinds of greed. He says, watch out, for being greedy. And we have a hard time recognizing greed in our own lives. We might be able to point it out in other people.
Oh, yeah.
And what strikes me is that Jesus was telling this to mostly people who were not wealthy. In fact, many of them would have been poor in worldly standards like 2,000 years ago. And yet he's telling them, watch out against all kinds of greed. So I think he's speaking maybe at a human level, maybe in a more universal sense, that all of us can be tempted to greed in our own ways, at any life stage or position or class location we find ourselves in. We could all be tempted towards greed, and that's a danger we need to look out for.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think, but I would just encourage anybody who to those who just kind of bristle at this whole topic, I would just say, why is that? Maybe learn why you would find that you can't even think about or talk or want to talk about generosity, and maybe figure out what some of the reasons are behind that. And that could be a good place to start, not to push you in one direction or anything like that, but to say, well, why is that? Why do you think you resist the topic of generosity? And then maybe trust God to grow you where you are and be patient with that longer term journey.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not an easy snap your fingers and it's changed kind of thing as most.
But I get it. Like I said, as a pastor who often has to talk to people about generosity, I know that there are a lot of pitfalls, and maybe it can look really hypocritical to be a church employee asking for money in this day and age.
Yeah.
When I feel very strongly that the church is an institution that does so much good, but not everyone sees it that way. Right. So I understand why some have legitimate reservations about giving to an institution like the church, especially as you mentioned, when there are some examples in other areas where perhaps the church in general has not done well with what has been entrusted to them. And so one thing I like about our church is that there's at least 3 committees that look over the finances. So it's not one person, directing the
and I think if anybody said, hey, I would really like to take a look at this.
Here you go.
Have a spreadsheet.
Here's
Bob's got graphs.
Yep.
And I think if you feel that way and you go to whatever institution and you ask for those things and they don't want to give it to you.
Right.
Then I would be wary.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
But this is a lot to think about. And I like the advice of, take some time and go to Jesus with it and, be open to growth and to change in that direction.
God will meet you where you are.
Yeah. You can't outrun God. He's right there.
That's right.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Justin.
You got it.
And we hope we'll catch you on the next one. Thanks for joining us for this episode of Bite Size Theology, where we take big ideas about faith and break them down one bite at a time. We hope today's conversation has helped you grow in your understanding and sparked new insights on your journey of faith. If you found this helpful, don't forget to subscribe, share, and leave us a review. And as always, if you have questions or you want to dive deeper into today's topic, feel free to reach out. We would love to hear from you. Until next time, keep seeking, keep questioning, and keep growing.